Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Utah Story Show. So we have a very exciting guest on the show today. It's Representative Phil Lyman. He has been an outspoken advocate for public land in the hands of Utahns and Utah entrepreneurs and farmers, as opposed to being under federal control. We're going to be talking about the reduction of bears' ears by the Trump administration, the pros and cons of that policy, as well as what we can do to strengthen rural Utah economic development. It's a big issue because all over in rural America, we're seeing more communities failing. A lot of communities are having a big problem with the opioid crisis. More people are moving to cities because of this, so it's a huge issue, and we want to get right into it with Representative Lyman. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about a new advertiser of ours. So the lakes are open, and you can get out of the house and rent a jet ski from Action Toy Rental. This summer, if you rent 2 jet skis, you can get them for just $277 a day. That's for both of them. So take your friends and family out to the lake and enjoy a set of fast Yamaha jet skis and pull someone on a tube, a wakeboard, or water skis. These are huge and powerful. So book them online using coupon code UT2020 to save an additional $40. If you don't want to wait until the last minute to make your reservation, because the weekends especially book up very quickly. So go to actiontoyrental.com to see what days are available and book your 2 jet skis for any day you want to go to the lake. Action Toy Rental offers lakeside delivery, or you can pick up them from their Salt Lake City location. Action Toy Rental is Utah's jet ski rental company. They have excellent 5-star reviews from Wave Runner, boat, and jet ski rating customers because they focus on being affordable, flexible, and easy to work with while providing high quality, top-of-the-line water sport machines. So go to Action Toy Rental, bring the fun to your next day on the lake. The lakes are open with a set of jet skis. You're going to have a ton of fun. Remember, use coupon code UT2020 when booking your online reservation over the phone so you get that extra discount. All right. Representative Phil Lyman, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, we've seen a lot of controversy over the reduction of the size of bears' ears after, and this is definitely an issue that falls along political lines. The more liberal Democrats believe all of our national parks, national monuments should be more federally controlled. A lot more conservatives in Utah, especially in the state legislature, believe we need to reduce the sizes of those parks and those national monuments. Why is this such a politically divisive issue, do you think?
Well, I think the controversial move was when it was designated by President Obama, and at 1.3, 1.4 million acres. That was the controversial move. President Trump just corrected that that gross abuse of the Antiquities Act by bringing it back into line. And obviously that's always going to be controversial with the left and those that are trying to push for more and more centralized control of Utah. But for those who live in Utah and those who believe that Utah should have more jurisdiction within its boundaries, that reduction was a welcome reduction. Just put us in a better position to potentially use those lands in that designated Bears Ears and the Grand Staircase Escalante national monuments for more productive uses.
So the more recent criticism, besides all over my neighborhood in Sugar House seeing save Bears Ears, the more recent controversy has been the opening up of bidding for public lands that are quite close to Canyonlands National Park. Do you support those lands being open for bid, or do you see the sides that the more liberal people, the Democrats, have taken, where they believe that should completely be shut down?
Well, I think you have to take a step back a little further than that. What we think is a good idea or a bad idea should ultimately be, measured against the Constitution. And the question really is: should the federal government determine what we do in Utah. Are we a state or are we a territory? The enclave clause gives the federal government, right to do certain things within states with the permission and the approval of the state legislature. But owning 67% of the state and controlling every inch of that land that's considered federal land is way beyond the constitutional provisions, that were laid out. So then you go back to flip my 1976 that it changed from a federal position of disposition of lands to retention of lands. And I would say that that's unconstitutional. The state should have fought it harder then. We're fighting it now. But then we come back to your question, which is, should the lands surrounding Canyonlands be protected and treated as if they're inside Canyonlands? And the answer to that is no. Canyonlands has a boundary, and the federal national parks provisions that protect lands within the boundaries of national parks shouldn't then, have a buffer and then another buffer and then a view shed and all of those things that extend the reach and the power and the jurisdiction of the federal government. That needs to have a definite boundary, and that boundary is the boundary of Canyonlands.
So do you think that a view shed should not be protected, in your opinion?
Well, again, the question is, should the federal government have that arbitrary ability to say, well, we want to protect it, not because it's within the boundaries of the designation, but because it's within the view shed? So absolutely not. A view shed is not it's not a federally protected designation.
I think like you said, I think it's a local issue, and that should be for locals to decide. And if the people who are in that area, who run the parks, who are the locals, if they decide it's a problem, I think it should be their decision. Do you agree?
Well, you're talking kind of democratic principles, majority rule or mob rule, whatever the case may be, and in our Republican form of government, we have representative government, and we have a contract, and that contract ultimately is the Constitution. So, so to me, it really gets back to a foundational principle of what are the bounds of federal jurisdiction within a state, and that's a big question, and it's kind of broken. So then we end up having discussions like this as to, well, what do you think would be good, and what do you like, and what would you like to see? And I have, I definitely have opinions. I love living in a public land state. I love having access to public lands, and in San Juan County, where I live, you have some of the most unimpeded views and amazing terrain. And I certainly don't want to see that gone, but do I want that to be under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Land Management or the USDA?
What I don't like about this issue is it's so either or, and it seems like there's a middle ground there that it's being neglected. It's like, do we have Bears Ears be 1.3 million square miles, or do we have it be 300,000? I mean, and it's just like, let's protect our wild lands, let's protect our public lands, but why can't we do that locally? Why does it have to be under the auspices of the federal government to find that middle ground? Isn't there some sort of middle ground that can be reached between, let's drill in the middle or right outside of Canyonlands National Park, as opposed to not do any drilling at all?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with that. Just because someone is opposed to the BLM making the decisions doesn't mean that they're in favor of drilling anywhere and everywhere. And so we get back to jurisdictional questions, and of course I'm speaking as a legislator, so the jurisdictional question is the question: who is going to make that type of a decision? And all I know is that the federal government should not, within the boundaries of states, should not be making those kinds of decisions.
Yeah.
To the level that they are.
And that's where I totally agree with you. But unfortunately, a lot of my, Democratic friends and people I talk to a lot, they just have this terrible mistrust of Governor Gary Herbert and the state legislature. They think that everybody in the state legislature has the special interests in their back pocket, and the oil and gas companies are giving you money. Therefore, you can't possibly be unbiased in how you're coming up with your opinions. Do you get money from the oil and gas companies, first of all?
Myself, no, no, I don't.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think that it's just you live in Blanding. Did you grow up there and were you raised there?
yes, yeah.
So you probably spent your whole life on the public lands, and my guess is you'd want to see them be protected, right?
Well, protected is a nebulous term.
Yeah, it's just too broad of a term. I mean,
See, that's the thing. You turn it over to the BLM, and pretty soon they start putting up gates and fences and signs, and then they start arresting people and closing roads and working at the behest of the Great Old Broads from Colorado and the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, and these agencies get used as a whip against locals, and yeah, I hate that. And that's uh, if you've been on the receiving end of some of the abuse that comes from people like Dan Love at the BLM, you gain a healthy appreciation for jurisdiction and whose decision that should be, and it certainly should not be an unaccountable bureaucracy like the Bureau of Land Management.
yeah, so when you talk about some of the repercussions that have happened to some people, what are some examples of what you've seen happen to locals who just wanted to enjoy the lands that perhaps they were easily accessible just 20, 30 years ago, and now they're not?
Well, I mean, you're talking to a guy that spent 10 days in jail after going through a kangaroo federal court with corrupt U.S. attorneys, and all of it driven by the Great Old Broads and Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. Stephen Block, who's the executive director of Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, was best friends with Judge Robert Shelby, who was, pretended to be a judge in my case. Of course, we didn't find that out till after the conviction, and then they wanted to put me in jail for 2 years, and that was for driving on a county road. I never even left the county road. I drove down to the end of it, but because I was saying, hey, the federal government doesn't have the right to close this canyon, and we didn't drive into the restricted part. We just stopped at the end of the county road, turned around. But because I was willing to make some defiant statement, they turned it into a conspiracy charge and a federal offense. So I mean, I've got that personal experience. But
Yeah.
the reason that I was compelled to even resist their designation in the first place was because, they destroyed the lives of 26 people here in Blanding. Several suicides as a result. 300 federal agents, descended in the early morning hours, the pre-dawn hours on this little town, and
300 in Blanding?
300 federal agents, FBI, BLM,
Wow.
Dan Love at the head of it, and we said then, Dan Love is a tyrant, but they didn't believe that. They stood up for him. People like Larry Eckelhawk, who now works in the governor's office, stood up for Dan Love and condemned Dr. Red and his family, and then after and still does to this day, even though Dan Love has been shown to be he has a kill list. And this law enforcement officer, BLM, had a kill list, people that he wanted to kill, and or force them to commit suicide or whatever the case may be. And that's a scary thought. I don't even know if Dan Love has been fired. Nobody can tell you that, but I do know that honest people have had their lives destroyed. So, I mean, I'm probably getting way off topic here, and I don't.
No, I mean
glad-
that's the kind of point I would like more listeners to understand, because I experienced a lot of fallout when I just simply pointed out that people in rural areas need to be able to make a living. And if we are so-called protecting millions of acres of land, that's land that ranchers can't graze their cattle on. That's less land that people who can barely make ends meet can use to earn a living from. And perhaps that's not the best policy. I pointed that out in a issue of Utah Stories 2 years ago, and then I had a couple people who would no longer speak to me. And unfortunate, but It's just like it's just such a black and white issue, and it's like we can't protect our land as locals. We can't come in and say, "All right, let's try to do what we can to make Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance happy. Let's see what we can do to make the locals who are making their living by in the tour guiding industry happy, having access to those roads." I just don't understand why can't we give a little bit of trust locally.
So back in 2012, 13, 14, we formed our Public Lands Advisory Committee, and I was county commissioner then, and I was chairman of that committee. We invited a lot of the environmental groups and some of the industry people to come and to talk about those things. But when it all came down to it, we had a bunch of people towards the end that came in from the tribes and the wilderness advocacy groups, and they wanted 1.9 million acre national monument. And it's not that we were saying it's our decision. Congress, that decision was already made long ago. So we're dealing under the framework of a federal government that says that they have jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, as county commissioners, our job is to keep our schools open and funded, fill potholes, keep the roads going. Have you given any consideration to the economics of this? And every one of those groups said, no, we haven't. We don't care about the economics of this.
Yeah, they don't want to go there.
We just want to protect it. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really one-sided view of public lands, is to say we want it all protected. Mm-hmm. And we'll do anything we can to make it all protected. And it doesn't even there's no equation in that. There's just a demand. And then you've got the federal judges that will fall right in line with it. So county commissioners who are out there trying to figure out how to make ends meet and how to pay the bills, have no property tax base, 3% private property in some of these, and most of that is greenbelt. So you've got virtually no property tax base. All of this burden of search and rescue and things like that on the public lands. Mm-hmm. It's a recipe for failure, and it's totally against the Constitution. And that's why I keep coming back to that. If we would follow the Constitution, then we could make decisions on a rational, intelligent framework, instead of this what we've got right now, which is nebulous and arbitrary.
Yeah, and pointing out the constitutionality of it, you look at the original 13 states in the Union, and if I remember accurately, they have about 3 to 5% federal land, and then all the states that joined the Union later they joined, and I believe Utah was the 40th, something like that. Just more and more land is designated federal land, and the federal government's much more involved in our land use policy, and there's fewer people who can survive out west due to the federal government restrictions. And going back to like the liberal conservative divide on this issue, a lot of my liberal friends believe the world is overpopulated, and they point out, just look at the cities, and I just have to say to them, well, look what you're doing in restricting people's ability to make money in rural areas by saying you got to protect everything. I mean, you can't have it both ways. And such an obvious solution to the problem of overpopulated cities is to open up and loosen regulation in our rural communities so people can make a living. But do you is that about accurate with what I said regarding the original 13 colonies and the states out west?
Well, most of the states that were admitted to statehood prior to about 1870 have very little public land in them. So you've got the 90% of the public land is concentrated in 15 of the western states. So you get east of Colorado, and those lands were transferred according to the plan that was in place, and then it started to change, towards the end of the 19th century and into much more of a retention. Plus, when Utah was settled, they call it the wastelands. They refer to these western lands as wastelands because they don't have a lot of water. They weren't, it's not the breadbasket. and they didn't see the real push to like homestead on some of these rugged places.
Mm-hmm.
The constitutional mandate was still in place, but there wasn't just wasn't the settlement that was taking place in like Nebraska and
Yeah,
some of
because
those.
it's so all the land out here requires such heavy irrigation.
Yeah, and then
So
you also had the Taylor Grazing Act that came in mid 1800s that and a lot of this land out here was I don't know, for lack of a better term, was locked up under the Taylor Grazing Act. So you had these huge cattle companies. The largest cattle companies in the United States were right here in San Juan County for a while, the two largest. And they were grazing, overgrazing, everything else, but it was under the Taylor Grazing Act, and that was almost it was as good as ownership of the land. So they didn't have an incentive to homestead and things like that. So there was a lot of moving parts that brought us to the point that we are now. But getting back to kind of your ideological position that people come from and it is ideological. It's almost a religion for some people, the public lands, and to have an intelligent discussion with someone whose ideology is that we're overpopulated and that we've got to do something about climate change and it kind of like we have this control over nature that by what policies we make. That's hard to have a good discussion about economics with someone who's feeling that way. And I'm not discounting their ideology, but it is definitely an ideology and kind of a tribal reaction when you talk about doing anything other than complete preservation of public land. And like you say, down here in San Juan County, I live on the southern end of San Juan County, which is really it's about 2% private property. So you live on an island of private land within an ocean of public land, and if you have no control over that public domain, then you become pretty held hostage by those people that do make decisions on public
yeah,
lands.
you're a subject of federal power, and but to go back into your attempt to sort of make a stand, and you invited these environmental groups to come in. Have you been able to maintain those relationships at all with the environmental groups so they can understand just the basic economic issues at stake here?
Sadly, I would say no. I've not maintained those relationships.
Hmm.
Any of the relationships that I've had, such as with like Friends of Cedar Mesa down here, which I've been a member of for the last 25 years, up until the last 7 or 8 years, when they took a really hard left turn. And still, I felt like I had friends, and I could speak to them, but after I guess everything that I've been through, and then seeing some of the ideological response from what I would have called friends before. I don't call them friends now. I call them enemies.
Where does the discussion just break down? I mean, at what point do you guys just do they just say, okay, no, we're walking away from the table. There's no compromise here.
So Round Rivers out of Salt Lake, and they're a conservation group. Their director, Dennis Sizemore, probably epitomizes this the best. He came down when we were having our discussions over, then it was protecting areas of Cedar Mesa through a national conservation area. And he came into the meetings after a year of discussions with the Utah Dene Bikea, a group that I helped form and that I was very, very sympathetic towards. And he said, well, we don't want to have to slog this down your throat, but we will if that's what it takes. And I said, well, why would you even use that term when we're here to have a discussion about protecting these things? And I made the comment in our commission meeting that if these lands are sacred to one of our citizens, they're sacred to all of our citizens, and what someone wants protected, we're going to talk to them about that. But they turn right around and use a term like, well, we'll slog it down your throat.
And you what really down your throat?
A national monument.
Wow.
A 1.9 million acre national monument. And that's when you're saying, well, we're willing to do a 1.3 million acre national conservation area, but
Hmm.
they just have an agenda, and it's wilderness. And it's not wilderness for the sake of preservation. It's wilderness for the sake of a legacy for a person like Dennis Sizemore. He said, I want 10 million acres of wilderness basically to my name. And he doesn't care where it is or how he gets it. And that's the ideology that breaks down the relationship. It's like we're not having a discussion anymore about what makes sense to protect. We're dealing with a person's ego, a person's ideology, and that's what I find on the left to an alarming extent is that they are they're mean, and they're irrational, and they're ideological, and it's
Yeah,
impossible. And then they say the same thing about me, but the difference is I am living here, and I am dealing with all of the factors that come into living in a place like this.
yeah, and I talk to I mean, I'm very much an outdoors person, and so are my friends. And I've got a good friend who lives in Teasdale, who loves hunting. He loves nature and all that Capitol Reef has to offer. But what I like to point out to people who are on the left is, of course, you're a liberal living in a big city. You want clean air. You want to minimize corporate power in homogenizing community. You want strong local business, but you want the government to step in and preserve open space and land so you have a place to go to and breathe. But imagine yourself living in a small town, and imagine you just want to live and you want to make a living and you want to be able to, say, raise cattle. How are you going to feel if the federal government comes in and says, okay, all those grazing lands you had, we've decided those are wilderness now, and you can't graze your cattle on them anymore, and you've got to just stay where you got to stay on the private land that you own, and that's it. Then you can't make a living anymore. Then what do you do? Imagine you're in that position. What, you think you're going to be happy? I mean, nobody living in I mean, San Juan County, I contrasted with Grand County. I think a lot of Grand County's citizens, they make money in tourism, they make money in it. But a lot of them that I talk to, sort of off the record, who are in the even the travel and tourism business, they're like, man, we just can't speak out about this, but we really can't have more county roads shut down. We can't have more of our trails and paths designated under the Antiquities Act as being protected, but they're afraid. Can you understand where that fear comes from?
On the left, where their fear comes from.
Yeah, to speak out about it, that how they don't want to have more protection.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean that the left will turn. I mean, they hate people like me, but who they hate the most is somebody who's kind of on the left who starts to switch sides. And yeah, you're expected to toe the line. You're expected to carry the water for the organization. So yes, yeah, it is a fearful thing. Then that's what drives it. It's not rational, and it's not contract driven. It's fear.
And when you said that some of the people who were holding in defiance, like you were, actually committed suicide, what did these people lose their means to earn a living? What caused them to do that?
Well, one of them was Ted Gardner, the BLM informant, uh, who after he saw the damage that came from his dealings with Dan Love, and what Dan Love had in mind. Instead of finding out what was going on and trying to correct it, he had in mind to kill people. He took his life. The other one, the first one, was Dr. Red, Jim Red, here in Blanding, and yes, he was a physician, all of this in context. It goes back years and years of a conflict that Jim found himself in with the BLM, and he won a court case, and that created a vindictive BLM person who decided that no matter what happened, they were going to get him, and so it kept coming at him and yeah, he was interrogated very roughly in his own garage for 4 hours. They pressed charges against him and his wife, or him and his wife and his daughter. Told them that they were going to jail for the rest of their life. He was losing his license to practice medicine. So yeah, I mean, they destroyed his life. And the next morning, after he went and did his rounds at the nursing home to take care of his patients, he took his life, and it was senseless. It was unnecessary. And having been on the receiving end of the BLM and knowing how they use the media, to set the groundwork for what they're going to do, and they destroy a person's character and reputation. I can completely relate to someone in the level of duress that they would feel that they might come to that conclusion or that state.
That's terrible. And I mean, I've met a lot of really wonderful people from the BLM. I did a river rafting trip down the Yampa River with a group of BLM Wild River folks, and they were super nice people. But I think that maybe the higher you go towards the top, I don't know the details. Is that where you see the the personal legacies show up and the vindictiveness appear?
I don't know. That's a hard question. You have a person like Dan Love, and his superiors who are unwilling to correct him. And so I don't know if they're naive to what's going on, if they're not seeing it. You get back into the history. If you ever look into Dan Love's criminal history now, you find out that he was protected all along by people who knew the level of corruption that he was dealing in. So as an organization, or I should say, as an agency, I have no trust for the BLM. That doesn't mean that I dislike anybody that works in the BLM on a personal level, but as an agency, they're corrupt, and those that decide that they're going to stay with the corrupt agency, I have to question their judgment.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a break there, and we're going to continue the conversation in a part 2. We got to keep these down to 30 minutes. But I want to tell you about one of our advertisers. On the second part of this, we're going to talk about more local issues related to growth and development around Moab and how that is actually expanding into San Juan County. But I want to tell you about our advertiser, Canyon Meadows Grass-Fed Beef. If you have not tried yet pasture-raised beef, you need to try Canyon Meadows. Their ranch is located in eastern Utah in beautiful Altamont. Visit cmrbeef.com to stock up on ground beef, roasts, and steaks. They have pickup locations throughout Salt Lake City. And if you haven't yet discovered the difference between factory farm beef and pasture-raised beef, you really need to taste it. Give it a try for yourself. Go visit cmrbeef.com right now. They have an offer code UTStories for a special discount. It's good for the earth, it's good for you, and it's delicious flavor. All right. For those of you joining us for part 2 of the talk with Representative Philip Lyman, I just wanted to touch on the fact that Moab is growing extremely fast. It's become sort of an international recreational destination. And a lot of the stories we've done recently in Moab have pointed out how they've discontinued overnight rentals in a lot of homes in Moab. They've decided that they want to maintain their zoning laws, so there can't be a lot of building going on. They've done a moratorium on hotels. That's been lifted recently, so they will be building more hotels. San Juan County's approach has been quite a bit different in that you have more loose zoning laws and you're more inviting to business. Is that starting to pay off in terms of tax revenue for you guys in San Juan County?
No, I mean we have fewer restrictions on development, but that's probably just because we've had a lot less demand for development.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing some growth all the time. San Juan County is growing steadily, and our fastest growing community is Spanish Valley, which is just south of Moab. So So that's a lot of spillover from Grand County into San Juan County. Um, but it's very slow and mostly residential right now. And Grand County's done a pretty good job of squashing any commercial development just south of their border in San Juan County. So
It seemed
so
like wasn't there a Walmart slated for development, and and don't they still own land there that they were going to build?
Walmart, to my knowledge, doesn't own land there. Big Love's Truck Stop was the latest thing that, and I think it's still on, but it's been delayed by a couple of years now just because of protests from the people at Pat Creek and some of the people in Moab. For years, San Juan County was trying to develop their own sewer system. But we decided to develop our own sewer system in Grand County. So we'll just tie into ours because theirs needed a big upgrade and it's a lot more economical to put 8,000 people on one sewer system than to have two completely separate ones. But one of their provisions was that there'd be no commercial development in San Juan County. And so government moves slowly and those kind of negotiations take a long time. And so that's probably been going for maybe 7 or 8 years. But I think we've overcome that and we are putting in the sewer system. San Juan County is paying for it, but it's going to tap into Grand County. And right now there's no official moratorium on commercial development in Spanish Valley, but there is a lot of protest whenever any commercial development starts to happen.
And why is that? Why do they see any commercial development as a threat?
Well, I think there's 2 reasons. One you're talking about on the San Juan County side, we have Pat Creek, which is really a stronghold for the Ed Abbey Monkey Ranch gang group, right. And so they're adamant and kind of religiously so, and so they don't want development. And then the other part of it is Grand County. If there is development, they would prefer to see it on their side of the line. If there's a Walmart, they would prefer to have it in Grand County than to see it in San Juan County, just for the tax revenues. If there's a hospital, they would prefer to have that in Grand County and not in San Juan County for some of the same reasons. So, it's just a little bit territorial, and that's to be expected when you draw boundaries on a map. They start to mean something over time.
But there have been a lot of residential developments on the San Juan side recently. I went out with our realtor. We've been looking around there for years to actually try to buy a place, and it's just gone crazy in last couple of years. But he was showing me nightly rentals on the San Juan side, and big residential areas, and that's where actually you're doing affordable housing. I mean, the biggest problem in Moab is affordable housing. There's just nothing. But on the San Juan side, where you're loosening up the zoning laws, it seems like you have a lot of space if you have the water resources and the sewer lines, like you said.
Right.
What's the population base you could support in the Spanish Valley area?
Well, Moab's such a cool place, as you know, but it's between it's in that canyon and it's landlocked and it's a lot of public land outside of that. So if there is going to be development, it's going to be south, and Sitla has blocked up, most of that land south of Moab and south of Spanish Valley is all Sitla property. So Sitla's in the development business. They'd love to see it develop, but they want to do it intelligently and get the most money from their development.
What does Sitla stand for?
Oh, sorry, that's the State Institutional Trust Lands Administration. So it's your school section.
Got it.
The blue squares on the map. But as far as what could it support, San Juan County has a lot of water rights out of the Colorado River Basin, and then it's sewers. So there's water. Unlike a lot of places in southeastern Utah, we are next to the river, and then it always becomes a point of contention with people downstream, California, as to how much water we take out. But we have a right to take out enough water to support a community of 50,000 people, if that's what it wanted to do. But yeah, so water's always a point of contention, and public and private property. But in Spanish Valley, you have a lot of both.
And so this Sitla organization wants to develop a master plan, I suppose, for how it will be developed in a manner that um, is probably not going to just congest the roads and make everything
Right.
difficult for the residents. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right. And
Yeah.
they're good partners. They do have a long-term plan, and you know you can look and see what they have. But when I say they're developers, they're always happy to partner with developers,
Hmm.
uh, and so I suspect Spanish Valley will continue to grow, and we're working on some kind of core infrastructure things in the Spanish Valley area that will facilitate that. The sewer system being one of them. A bypass road around Moab would be, everybody wants that, including Grant County and the people of Moab, if they could get some sort of boulevard that didn't have to congest Main Street. And all those things are in the works. The college is growing there, Utah State's extension. You've seen probably if you've been to Moab on the south end, all of those new roads that they've put in. And uh, anyway, they're moving forward.
Yeah, it's
Moab's
cool
got
to
a really
see.
bright
It's
future.
like I expect that whole area will become far more populated in the coming years. And of course, the big question comes down to, will those people who've been there for so long be able to maintain their standard of living and be able to still find peace and solitude? And that's always the trade-off. But I mean, it's just where people want to be. It's just such a beautiful area, and it's so it just right on the river. It's so nice, and
Mhm.
but I find it I find it especially interesting because I just happen to like these ideological battles. And those on the left, they of course want to preserve the zoning laws, and especially I go up to Castle Valley, and I mean they said every lot is 5 acres, and if you wanted to have affordable housing, there you go. There's this perfect solution. Just release some of those zoning laws and allow people to build a mini house park or something. And then you could open up a whole community for those who service the whole tourism industry of affordable housing. But they just keep such a tight hold on those zoning laws, and it just prevents growth and development, and it causes property values to spike. And the only people, I mean, then I talked to the mayor about it, and she says, "We'll look at the take a closer look at community rebuilds and the sweat equity programs that allow people to build their own homes." So we got a story about that, but it still doesn't change the fact that if you want to buy a single family home in Moab, it's the same as it costs in Sugar House in Salt Lake City. It's like $400,000 to $500,000. As I mean, is that an issue you in San Juan County are trying to take a concerted effort to alleviate?
Well, I guess my effort would be to kind of like you alluded to allow a little bit more development in places that aren't so um, such a hotbed and controversial. And I'm not a big fan of growth for the sake of growth. But for example, you've got a large blank spot in Utah, and it's over around Tickaboo and Hanksville and Lake Powell, and most of us would prefer to see that remain a big blank spot. But if you were to develop some roads, maybe a bridge from Bullfrog to Hall's Crossing and down to through Navajo Mountain, which they're working on. Navajo Mountain's trying to get a road from Aljedo to Navajo Mountain. You develop a little bit of that, and pretty soon maybe Tickaboo is a alternative to Moab with as much to offer, if not more, and take away some of the congestion and the demand for that lifestyle that Moab has.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could go across the map and find 100 other Moab quality places that probably should stay Moab quality by not having all the people. But to say that Moab is the only place, and they like that, Moab
Mm-hmm.
has promoted themselves as the capital for mountain
Well,
biking, and
they're
one place.
attracting so much capital. Marriott just is investing right now in a huge resort there that's upwards of, I think, $50 million resort, and it's going to be an international destination for the owners of timeshares through Marriott, and just a ton of capital pouring into there.
You
And
know,
it's
for me down here in Blanding, we always feel like we've probably got, a better outdoor experience. I always tell people, if you like people, go to Moab. If you like the outdoors, come south. Uh, and so there's a part of me that says, if Moab wants to sell out to the tourism industry, I don't begrudge them that, and all those condos that are going in up there. I think that hopefully they like it. I know some people really hate it up there, but I don't mind seeing all that growth in Moab.
And I noticed you said Tickaboo and Hanksville, not Blanding, as being the alternative to Moab. You really don't want to see that growth come down there.
I think people should be free to do what is the right thing to do, and some communities want to grow. Blanding wants to grow, and it has grown with healthcare and education. Moab wants to grow, and it has grown with tourism. I think Tickaboo would like to be bigger and much more of a tourist destination. So I mean, I wouldn't impose my vision on Blanding, even though I live here. I wouldn't impose my vision anywhere else. I like tourism. I think it's a great industry, but I also like extractive industries. I think they're fantastic, and I love the nuclear potential, and I think the future of the country is going to continue to move towards a more nuclear power grid, and that's exciting to me. And I'd love for San Juan County to be participating in that, and just not encumbered by all of the ideological irrational constraints, to have an actual conversation about some of these things, and whether they're worth pursuing or not.
Yeah, and I think it's a really valid discussion of what kind of growth you want to experience in your community and your county, because I always pass through Carbon County when I'm going to Moab, and I talk to people in Helper, and so many of the old timers just want to see coal come back, and I don't think it ever is. But so many people also do not want to see Helper turn into a Moab. They don't want to see the escalation of property values, so nobody can afford to live there. And I suppose that's the same sentiment you have in San Juan County and places like Blanding and Bluff. And so is that really the pervasive sentiment, that you really want to maintain your very separate identity as not being a tourism capital of the world there?
I think, again, I can only speak for myself, but I would say that's the pervasive view in Blanding, that they're not wanting to be a tourist only community. And we're very different. Bluff is such a unique place, and that's kind of the mother community for most of people in this area. And so we love to see it keep some of its pioneer culture. Monticello has always been very much a cattle community, and I love the rodeo and that they have there, the county fair. So we've got some differences. Montezuma Creek is a special place, and I think tons of potential there. It's on the reservation, kind of that checkerboard. So, and then you could go all the way down, Monument Valley and Mexican Hat, and all of these communities are so different, and so interesting if they're able to be what they are and not try to be turned into something that they're not. And whether the growth happens or not is not as important to me as whether people have freedom, whether they're able to pursue their vision on their own private property, or have some engagement with some of these agencies on public land.
Yeah, well, I think that's well said, and I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. I just encourage people, like I consider myself an independent. I'm a libertarian when I'm in rural Utah. I'm a liberal when I'm in the city. But listen to the other side. It's like people want to be able to make a living. Everybody says they love freedom. But as soon as you get the federal government protecting more and more and more and more land, more people in the city need to understand that's when freedom is lost. It is so hard to be free in a rural area surrounded by public land, like you said, an island of private land in a sea of federal land, and to be able to make a living and have a viable economy separate from the tourism industry, because I don't think anybody in Moab or anywhere wants to be connected to the ball and chain of the tourism all the time. Everybody wants a year-round, authentic community.
Right.
So I sure appreciate you talking to me, Representative Lyman.
Well, Tyler, I've enjoyed it, and I appreciate the chance to talk anytime.
Yeah, Tyler's our tech. My name's Richard, but thanks a lot. I appreciate
Okay,
it.
Richard.
All
That's
right.
the name that was popping up on my screen. Sorry about that.
No, that's no problem. All right, and thanks for watching the Utah Story Show. I really appreciate all the support we've had. We've gotten 1,000 additional subscribers on YouTube. That's extremely encouraging. And the number one way you can help us spread the message of Utah Stories, which is basically helping bridge political divides, putting truth on the pedestal over party politics and division and tribalism, is sharing this episode with a friend. That's really the best thing you can do to help us share this program. We're not heavily involved with social media. Facebook banned us for some reason in promoting our posts. It's happened to a lot of people who it seems that are unfortunately just seeking truth. So if you can share it on your Facebook page individually and you can boost our post that way, that's awesome. If you can leave a comment or subscribe to our channel, that's always really helpful. If you visit utahstories.com and you subscribe to our newsletter, that's how you can get all the updates on all the stories and content we're producing. So we are now 2 months into our digital pivot, and it's been really awesome to see what's happened. We've seen huge growth in our YouTube channel. In particular, we've had went from something like 1,800 hours watched per month to 180,000 hours of our content watched per month. But I can tell you about 95% of the content that people are watching are videos that are on the Ben Shapiro protests at the University of Utah back from 2017. Those videos get about 95% of our traffic. But still, it's great to see the podcast is also doing well. You guys are commenting on the podcast, and I really appreciate that. So I want to tell you about our final advertiser. The Utah Story Show is also brought to you by the Carpet Barn. So if you have not visited the Carpet Barn, it's an experience you have to go and check out. It's a massive 25,000 square foot warehouse full of carpet that has been bought on the cheap, that is overstock and has some kind of maybe minor defect. I recently bought carpet from the Carpet Barn for $9 a yard. It was far cheaper than the big box store carpet, and it's high thread count, plush, beautiful carpet. Their team there helped me out incredibly. They were incredibly helpful, and their customer service was awesome. They are in South Salt Lake, and be sure to mention you found them on the Utah Stories Show. All right. Thank you again for watching. Our technical producer is Tyler Bond. Our booking manager is Connie Lewis, and our digital publisher is Golda Hukic Markosian. I'll see you next time.